I'm so grateful to be here, and I am so thankful. I'm such a non-belonger in here, though, because I'm like from Washington State, and all of you are New Hampshireans. What do we call ourselves? Knights, New Hampshire, thank you. Well, thank you to Dartmouth Hitchcock for the generosity of leading and making this happen. You know, I had the time of my life listening to these teens this morning, and I'm not exaggerating. I was a middle school teacher back before I went to medical school, and I miss you, and I miss your intelligence and wisdom and gift. And the profundity here today, from, I think, Judge Broderick's work and commitment and from the organization here is to say, put the teens at the center of what's being discussed and put them on stage. So I've been rewriting my talk all morning in my mind because I'm like, I shouldn't even be up here. I kind of could listen to these teens. My hope is to just share a couple of stories, but first and foremost, I want to let you know I do speak all over the country and the world, and I work with Dr. Sagi, who's amazing, and it's so wonderful that you highlighted those 4 things about resiliency and adverse events in children's lives. But I did bring a prop because I'm a little bit nervous. So I brought RBG to sit up here with me, and I just wanted you to know that it's actually, I'm going to let her do a backbend here on the podium. So RBG's here with us, and hopefully that's a nod to how important the judicial system is, legislators. Having been a middle school teacher, I am so grateful for the teachers in the room, and I heard a number of times people saying, I'm just a parent here today. I mean, give me a break, like you're a parent. Thank God you're here. We're so thankful, and I hope next time you do this, whenever it is, I will call and try to recruit anybody to get them here, and I would love to come and sit and listen. But more and more parents being involved will be helpful to listen to these teens. So my hope today is really when you do a didactic talk, honest to goodness, like you can teach usually one thing in like an hour. I don't have an hour, so I'm going to give you one half thing, hopefully. But I really believe that it's a feeling of your great capacity and your depth at being older. I mean, I was thinking, like, if I open with an F-bomb, will this go better for me? No. But here's the problem, you guys, about being an adult. Like, you can't keep a job as long if you start with the F-bomb. So I'm thinking, like, I have to model some behavior for these teens too. So anyway, but I'm going to just kind of share these stories and really my own experience. I'm going to open, and I'm going to buzz through it a little faster than I thought. But my own experience of kind of acting like a teenager, and I would love to still be a teenager, even though it was hard. Like, middle school was hard for me, and high school was hard for me, and I tried to do everything right, but I loved your description about the binary nature of, like, you got to be this, but you can't be that, and you got to be that, and you can't be that. And I would say Heather just described my entire talk about the benefits of peer-to-peer support and using social tools and connecting with each other. But I'm going to talk as best I can as kind of a lame grown-up and ex-teenager and ex-teacher, and I'm a parent too, and it's the most important privilege that I have in my life to raise 2 little boys. And I've used them in my life and career, and I ultimately am kind of fighting for the science and safety of vaccines. I am fighting for the voice of children, and I am fighting for this to get better. I can't believe that I sat in a session yesterday. I'm so disconnected from being a teenager. I'm so disconnected from being a middle school and junior high school teacher. I can't even believe how scared kids are when they go to school these days. I can't believe how different it is for them. And it is our job in roles and leadership and parenthood and legislation and pediatrics and health systems to do what you're doing. So you're awesome, and thank you so much. Really, like, you're awesome. So the other thing, Jim, I don't know if you're still in the room. Are you here? Have you left? Shoot. I think he should help us populate these kind of events across the country. New Hampshire can guide Washington State, and I will help you, and other states across the country at doing the same thing. So let's figure out what you guys learn and coalesce again in a year or 2, and then we can replicate this across the country. Okay, so more and more, I just want to start with, we are more connected than ever before. It was John Muir, the environmentalist, who said if you tug on anything in nature, you'll find that it's connected to everything in the universe. And more, the profound opportunity of this time are these digital tools. Stop finger wagging. Stop telling teenagers to get off their phone. I mean, thank God we should teach them to not use them when they drive, but it is our bad example, to their point today, that has got us in such bad situations. It is not just teenagers who are doing it wrong. In fact, it's most of us who are modeling it wrong. But we can use these tools, and we can use each other, and we can use the really immense opportunity of technology and communication tools of today to be more connected and to act up. I mean, think about what Facebook Live has done from a safety standpoint when it comes to police shooting. Think about what Twitter has done to political campaigns for good and bad, and think of what Twitter has done for activism, and I'll show you a couple examples. But we really live in an amazing time. Just as a kind of sense of bias, I trained in bioethics. I also trained in medicine. I'm a pediatrician, as you guys know. And I work in technology where the title is I'm a chief of digital innovation. And I think women should announce that they're chiefs when they are. So you have a chief executive here in this room, and you have other chiefs, but we need to keep making sure we keep those titles. So I encourage any girl and boy to celebrate in each other leadership roles that you're given and use them humbly but responsibly. I'm on Twitter, though, and I was one of the first pediatricians on Twitter, and really at first people, and I'm not kidding you, they laughed at me when I told them I was going to start a blog at Seattle Children's. So Seattle Children's is a large academic hospital, University of Washington. We're one of the biggest hospitals in the country, and I started the first blog there and convinced them to pay me to do it because I said, you know, Jenny McCarthy went on Oprah and she told everybody shouldn't get an MMR vaccine because the light went out of her son's eyes. And her story, her anecdote, her story of one has changed the lives of every pediatrician and parent and child in this country in understanding even the safety of vaccines. So I went on Twitter, I go on Facebook. I've been on Twitter for probably, I mean, my screen time looks dismal, people. I've probably been on Twitter already an hour this morning listening. I think I've said one thing, but I've been listening a lot. So I use all of these different places. I've worked for NBC, so I've been a news reporter for the last 6 years as well on a weekly station in Seattle, and I do lots of media, but I'm just trying to figure out how messages move around and how kids can really help us change this just like you are. So more than ever, as you guys know, it is really a new time. And I love the lessons of Herbert Simon, he was a professor of economics. So he kind of studied money and money moving around. He was at Carnegie Mellon, and my father-in-law was one of his students way back when. But he coined the term attention economy, and that was way back in 1971. And what he was talking about was ultimately that what is most precious in people's lives is their attention. And when I think about what Maura just shared, and when I think about the messages of these teens, we are all seeking a sense of belonging. We are all seeking a sense of connection. And our time together is becoming more and more perishable. So as you're thinking about anything you're doing, you have to think about how you're going to capture attention. You can build the most amazing center. You can write the most ingenious study. But how are you going to capture someone's attention to learn from what you've done? So your communication might be one of your most important assets and tools and technologies and in your lifetime. But I hail from Seattle, and I have to carry a couple of things from you since I'm this outsider in the room, even though I do feel a sense of belonging here, so thank you. But I've had the kind of luck of being involved at high levels with leaders, and at Starbucks I met with their chief of digital, and their chief of digital at the time was reporting to Howard Schultz, and he was the one who said, like, we got to sell a lot of coffee. So the first thing they did from a digital standpoint was they made it free Wi-Fi in Starbucks. They were like low-hanging fruit. Let's make it a better place. That's how we're going to like run the world and sell the most coffee in the world. But the second thing they did was instead of actually building and bringing in business leaders, they brought in a theologian. They brought in a theologian to Starbucks to say, how are we going to like dominate the industry? And the theologian said, you're not selling coffee. These $4.59 lattes that people waste their money on, me, all the time, you're selling the start of a day. You're selling the feeling that you got this. It's together. There's something going on. And ultimately, they went into Starbucks all over the world, and they said, what do people want? And they interviewed clients and customers everywhere. And they wanted universally one thing. They wanted to feel known. I actually don't think there's anything much more profound, and I think this is why Starbucks is selling more coffee than anybody else. They make you a coffee, they walk in, they say hello to you. They look at you in the eyes. They make you a coffee, they put your name, they ask you what your name is, how you want your name. Think of all the funny little memes when people get your names wrong, right? And people in this country who are immigrants, who have names that are hard to pronounce, they come up with coffee names, right? We're so inhospitable in learning people's names, we have to come up with coffee names even. But they put the name on the cup of coffee, and then they tell you if it doesn't go well, we'll make it for you again. But if anything, I'll say, when I think about digital innovation, and I think about the teen voice, and I think about the suffering that is ongoing in teens in ways that I'll demonstrate today from a data standpoint, what we all want in some ways is to feel known. Unless we believe that taking their phones away from them or disconnecting them from their social networks or believing that Instagram isn't important, it's extremely troubling and complicated at times, but it is also a place of belonging and joining and culture and learning and fantasy and like dreams. So lest that we take these dreams away and less that we say they're bad for us, we can kind of think differently about how we incorporate them. The largest community on the planet, the largest population that exists is not in India and it is not in China, it is on Facebook. 2.2 billion users actively on a monthly basis go to one place. Facebook calls it the blue app. I was with Facebook leaders at their campus recently. They've got the green app, WhatsApp, right? And then they've got the rainbow in Instagram. So they have collected and created the most organized, largest population in the world. So we can't actually forget that. Teens, as of recently, have now across this country, 95% of teens, as surveyed within the last 6 months, have access to a smartphone. So it's either theirs or they have access to it. And more, we used to kind of use these, we used to use in hospital systems at least, the excuse that we couldn't design and build digital technology because we were excluding certain populations, and more we're realizing that these are probably some of the best places for us to go to do different things. We go online to do all sorts of things. You know, Mayo Clinic probably has the strongest brand in healthcare in the world, the #1 hospital system in the United States because of rankings that you can criticize. But at the same time, they have one of the strongest brands. And what Google did with Mayo is they said, wait, people are going online, all of us, 8 out of 10 Americans every month go online and search for something about health for themselves or someone they love, or they're nosy because their next door neighbor's sister's daughter, cousin got, and then they go look it up, right? But Mayo Clinic partnered with Google about 2 or 3 years ago and said, well, let's look at aggregated, what we call big data. Big data just means what are people doing and looking at a data set of what they're doing on Google, and then can we create answers for it? And they took Mayo Clinic information and put it in the right margin. So when you search, you can get a great piece of advice. In fact, when you look at search online, over 55% of college-educated people go online and they self-diagnose. Teens go online and they self-diagnose. That's a good thing. We can stop saying that's a bad thing and be so paternalistic. Somebody doesn't need to come and talk to me about pink eye. In fact, most teens are learning from each other what to do. Hey, what's the favorite birth control that you're using? Oh, you don't have to take pills anymore. Actually, the best thing to do now is what's called a LARC, a long-acting reversible contraception, something like an IUD. The improvement at protecting against teen pregnancy, right, is 99% effective, whereas if they're using condoms or they're not using protection at all, right, we go way down to the 80%. We have some of the lowest teen pregnancy rates that we've ever had in this country. We're doing great. Kids are having sexual debut, the first time they have sexual intercourse, later in their lives than they used to before. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know I don't want to make a moral judgment on that, but I think teens are taking time to think about how they connect and use their bodies. 99% of teens at the age of 18, if they're female, have said that when they had sexual encounters, they used some kind of protection. Teens are awesome. They're thinking really carefully. It's us who've screwed it up. We've made it hard to get access to contraception. We don't talk about it. We're uncomfortable. But they talk to each other. So let's emancipate that and allow them to do that so that when they're going online and searching, they're finding each other. People are searching on Facebook what kind of rash their baby has, right? So teens are hacking behind it. And I love to talk about vaccines because it's been really the pillar of my career, which I won't digress too much, but 1 out of 10 people only in this country don't follow the vaccine recommendations in the way that we recommend. But when you ask parents how they make decisions about vaccines, there's a beautiful study that was written by an anthropologist published in a pediatric journal called Pediatrics in 2013. And she said, I'm going to look at these groups who follow recommendations, and I'm going to look at the group who doesn't. 95% of them have someone in their network telling them what to do about the shots. Are they going to get the HPV shot right on time at age 9 now, if you want? Age 11? In fact, if you get it early, you only have to do 2 of them, and it's an anti-cancer vaccine, but did someone in their network say something? Well, those people who follow the advice of pediatricians and get the vaccines on time for their kids, only 13% of them said somebody in their social network told them not to vaccinate. But if they were hesitating on vaccines, or they're waiting a little bit and just extending the time that a child was not protected, or hesitating based on recommendations, 7 out of 10, 72%, said someone in their network told them not to do that. Means we got to be in people's networks. Teens are in each other's networks, but you as a leader, you as a hospital system, you as a parent, are you in the network of those who can make these decisions? Because if anything, we're getting inundated with information, and we are not alone. We're in some ways overwhelmed. But the reality is, people do go online. So it's not the internet's not perfect. Like, I'm not saying that. But we can contribute to what's there, and we can contribute to how even teens share with each other. So we know that's a screen grab from Jenny McCarthy. So does everyone know who Jenny McCarthy is before I go through that? So Jenny McCarthy is she's a mother. She had a career she's a celebrity ultimately. She had a career that people love to ridicule, but she had a career that involved in some cases pornography. But she became really famous, and she became really smart at using media. And if anything, I'd say, instead of criticizing her, in some ways what we should do is copy her. And what I should do as a pediatrician is copy her. But she went on, as I mentioned, she went on Oprah back in 2007 and said that she thought that the vaccine that her child had been given gave her child autism. Her child no longer has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and she's left the media presence really talking about this. But when Diane Sawyer in 2010 did an interview about pediatric studies and looking at gluten-free diets, and unfortunately their non-effect on autism spectrum disorders, instead of interviewing the doctor, they interviewed Jenny McCarthy, where she talked about her own son. So the power of one and the power of voice is immense, and we live in a very unique time in that it used to be that the press controlled all the microphones, and now there's what I like to call a democratization of media. Anyone in this room, anyone, can start talking, and with a clever idea, and with great chutzpah, and with a powerful story, you can probably get a lot of attention. And that can profoundly change what gets done. And I think you, in your mind, can think about the countless examples of that. But we can then leverage together rooms like this, instead of just using anecdotes and experience, really putting expertise along with that. And so, I really believe that healthcare systems, payers in the healthcare system, legislators, judges, we all do have a new set of responsibilities. And it will involve using your voice in different ways that historically made you uncomfortable. The reality is that when it comes to medicine or concert of understanding these things, we only get about 11 or 20 minutes with a pediatrician annually in this country for a wellness visit, and all sorts of healthcare happens at different times. So in my career, I've kind of see patients one at a time. And then I started doing a blog back in 2009, and then started doing all this media. And then I started really using social, but that was about listening. That was about hashtags. That was about recognizing that when something's going on, like this morning, fascinating, the NCAA coach for Notre Dame, who just beat UConn and is representing women basically in the sporting environment, is saying today she's no longer going to hire men. And that's a political debate that we might want to have. She's saying 99% of those employed in sports are men, and girls and need to feel kind of advanced from Title IX. We need to think differently about it. But that voice, that microphone, that ability, even today as leaders, we can think, what does that mean? What are our teens even hearing, and how do we respond to that using search? So very quickly, I do a blog, I do a podcast. I did a podcast that I wanted the teens to know about, because this is, as we think about teens going to each other, I did a podcast with a dermatologist about teen acne that's about 10 minutes long, but it's probably the best one I've ever done. I published last week, but it's really like all the questions. And I was thinking about one of the quotes you guys said earlier about kind of, we were talking about liars, but I love this quote from a dermatologist. There are two kinds of people in the world. There are poppers, and there are liars. So if you're a popper, I love this, you can go get yourself what's called a comedone extractor, because we're all poppers. But teen acne, I just want to say, when we talk about mental health, people love to dismiss acne. Now, 90% of teenagers have acne at some point. I had acne, and I've had adult acne. I actually have found it miserable. I get embarrassed by it. If you have a big zit on your face and you're talking, no one else is actually looking at the zit on your face. They really aren't, but I'm thinking about the zit on my face, and the way that I project my voice and who I am and connect might be completely distracted. Acne has great treatments, and all teens deserve access to that, because we know acne profoundly changes self-esteem issues and actually can lead to a lifelong of higher risk of anxiety and higher risk of depression. So we need to have teens access to, this health education, this idea that it's a half, I was thinking about this, it's a half it's a semester, right? A half year throughout a whole high school experience. When in high school is ultimately a social experience, and then it's an academic one. To the point of the quote today, right? Like, who cares what you got in biology in 10th grade? I have no idea what I got in biology in 10th grade, but I do know that I fell deeply in love when I was in high school. And someone could belittle that and say that didn't matter to me. But my first experience with my first partner in life was really meaningful and has shaped a lot of my understanding of the world. That's what really mattered to me. I was bullied in high school. I felt bad about myself at different times in high school. I had sleepless nights in that way. I cared a lot about my grades. I cared about my performance that way. My parents moved to a foreign country and left me. I was kind of abandoned. I had a hard time in high school. But it deeply galvanized who I am as an adult. So I love the idea in this room that you might be able to prioritize more time in this state for the things that matter. There's a class at Yale. I can't remember what it is, if anyone in the room knows, but there's a class at Yale that's the most oversubscribed class at Yale that's about life, like living a happy life. Have you guys heard about this? There's a TED Talk about it, and so go look at that curriculum, go talk to her. I'll connect anyone at the end of the day. I don't know her, but I know that it's one of the most oversubscribed courses now, and it's like this, it's such an emblem of like, what do we want in education? We want belonging and how-to and hacks. So think about how you guys can change what the health curriculum is and the priority for that. So I do all these blogs. Don't get too dizzy and vomit on me. But one thing I wanted to share was in this blog. So I've written like 800 blog posts over the last 9 years, and YouTube. We do a weekly YouTube and a podcast, and I use Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all for work. But one of the things that's been most profound to me is the post I get the most reads on is a post about toddlers waking up at night. It gets about 250,000 views every month, which is a kind of a big accomplishment, but it's just about toddlers. It's not a big deal. But what's a big deal is ultimately when I watch who's reading it, you can go, whenever you make anything, you can go and see with Google Analytics who's reading it when, in real time. So we could pull it up right now and we'd be like, okay, it is 11, it is, almost 1 in the morning in Singapore, and that's probably where somebody's reading it. Because they go in the middle of the night and they say, why is my toddler waking up at night? And then that's when they're reading it. So as we're designing and thinking, remember, like real-time search, how we're all going to get information is likely going to always not be in person. It's going to be great in person. I'm flowing through this because I got to get to the good stuff. So one thing about hashtags, so you guys were talking about the Me Too hashtag when you were on stage and the use of social tools, and you so brilliantly could have done my talk. But we took measles, so we're having measles outbreaks. We're having one in my home state. There's a big one in New York, as you know. We've only, there are 10% of adolescents, 10% of teens, so maybe a couple in this room who haven't been immunized against measles, mumps, rubella. Quite possibly one of the safest vaccines we have. And once you've had the dose of it, 98% of us on the planet will never get measles in a lifetime. Measles kills 1 in 1,000 people who gets it. And if you're in a room after someone's had measles and they've been there even 2 hours before you, if you're not vaccinated 9 out of 10 times, you're going to get it. Picnics. You could be breathing with measles, and if I wasn't vaccinated, I would probably end up with the infection. But we went on Twitter, and I partnered with pediatricians across the country. This is about 2 or 3 years ago when this was February 6, 2015. Almost 4 years ago. And that was the measles outbreak in Disneyland. But within a matter of 10 minutes, I said, let's just use the same hashtag, 10 minutes, got pediatricians from across the country. And in 10 minutes, that spike that you see of analytics, that's 20 million views that we had or impressions of that hashtag in 10 minutes. So you can use these social tools in really profound and different ways to organize around things that you care about. Okay, this new set of responsibilities. Just sitting here waiting for Facebook to go away. That's how a lot of us feel about social tools, and I think we can diminish kind of their power. But I think we need to do, when my brother graduated from high school, the old history teacher who I didn't really like, and you guys, just to be clear, I think I got a B in that class. There's been a lot of people talking about their perfect grade records. I went to an Ivy League med school, but I think I got a B in high school history. He did not like me, and I don't think I was very good at it. But he did go and talk at my brother's graduation, and he said this thing he'll never forget. And that was be a willow, not an oak. Just stop doing things like you think you always have to do them. Start doing them differently. So I want to point this out as I transition to the health topics that these teens basically articulated were their most important topics. And this was an article, one of the most read articles ever in the history of the Atlantic publications, called Smartphones Destroyed a Generation. I think it's worth your time. It's written by a researcher that has been somewhat criticized by the position she took in this article, but it really articulates kind of this dramatic decade that we have just come through. We're not even done with. In fact, Steve Jobs launched the iPhone in 2010. It's only 2019. And the way that human beings live, and I'm on my smartphone usually like 7 hours a day. I can see that because of my own screen time. Teens are watching, sometimes streaming videos on average 4 to 6 hours a day, and are spending with their phone probably more time than they spend with anybody else. I'm not sure these smartphones are destroying this generation, but I do think it's changing how we communicate, how we trust, and how we feel. And I think they told us that so beautifully today. Teens are overwhelmingly choosing Snapchat. This is last year's data. It changes fast enough that I don't even think we should make these predictions. I think we should just ask and understand what you like the most and then understand why. Typically, I think it is about belonging and connection, understanding and projecting yourself, trying on who you are, trying off who you are, understanding where you go with that. This is data from Common Sense Media, a really great nonprofit that helps us understand what content is for people. But ultimately, this is just percent of teens with a smartphone, as I was saying, so that says 89%. But look at the dramatic shift, 2012 to 2018. So it's 41%, now it's 89%. I think what's so crazy about this is the slope. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like 10 years from now. I don't know what AI and smart speakers, like having Alexa in your kitchen is going to do, or Alexa in your car is going to do, or if we're going to get a lot smarter. And I love that Ford is here. I think, every behavior change we know is most typically changed because there's a reward. Like, you actually probably brush your teeth because your parents did it and ritualized it, but you also get the reward, like they feel really slippery afterward. It feels so good, right? Like, that's the reward. It probably changes the behavior. I think Ford should give away a car in 50 states to teens after they make a pledge and demonstrate that they don't use their phones in ways that are dangerous. I mean, I think there's completely different ways that we could motivate people on different change. But I do just want to say, of course, the percent of teens that are using social media multiple times a day is up at 70%. That's a gross underestimation in some ways. One of the things that's most interesting, this was published just at the end of 2018, so just a few months ago, but is this green line. So this says, teens don't value face-to-face communication with friends as much as they used to. I don't actually agree with that. I think you do value face-to-face time. I mean, give me a flip and break. We're human beings. So are teens, of course. But we are behaving differently, right? So they're saying, how much time are they communicating, quote, in person versus texting? Part of that is that we make them live in their parents' houses. Right? Like, at night, I had to go home in my house when I was in high school. I couldn't hang out with my boyfriend all night. That wouldn't have been cool, or my best friend. So I would have been texting. I didn't have a cell phone, of course. I didn't get a cell phone. I'm not a digital native. I didn't get one until medical school. But that has surpassed this in-person time. But at the same time, I think we do build big intimacy using these different tools and trust. Now, this is Common Sense Media as well. So teens are much more likely to say social media has a positive rather than a negative effect on how they feel. And it's somewhat different based on who you are. And I'm going to show you some data in a little bit that's more illustrative of that. But social media users say when they're using social media, it makes them feel more or less lonely. So when they're using social media, 25% say it makes them feel less lonely, more popular, better about themselves, for example, different levels. But the more versus less can help us say there are positive aspects to these connections, and typically in hard times. But it might vary on who you are. So some of us, I'm a pretty anxious person. I love, recently I was thinking about Michelle Obama got so much attention that she and Barack Obama went to therapy. People were like, oh, thank God, people know that people go to marriage counseling, it's kind of hot. Like, I started going to therapy when I was in college. I feel like everywhere I go, I need to tell people this. I've been to a therapist within the last month. Like, life is hard. It's hard to share your ideas. It's hard to be, for me, a daughter. It's hard to be a partner to my spouse. It's hard to be a parent. It's hard to be a really good friend. It's hard to be a sister. It's hard to be a patient, all these different things. But it probably depends. So sometimes social media is really bad for me. People do bully me. People harass me. I have to have security details sometimes in places where I go because I talk about vaccines. So our teens, the experiences they're happening all over. And I loved that conversation today about bullying becoming kind of this tepid word. Like, I love that. And that these teens help me understand it. It's about that incessant nature, something that it's not a one-off, right? It's this over and over. But who we are really matters. So the darker purple here says, you have a lower social emotional well-being. That means on self-esteem assessments or depression inventories or anxiety inventories, you would maybe score higher points, meaning that it's harder in some ways. There's no criticism to that. It's just who some of us are. But we typically have what's called a more labile experience with social tools that way, meaning that if you're like me, if you're a little wired, if you're passionate and kind of crazy but emotional, like, I'm a crier. Like, I cry pretty easily when I'm happy. I cry pretty easily when I'm sad. My experience in social is then kind of dynamic. So the left one is the one I think that's most interesting. Sometimes people feel left out or excluded when using social media. Well, 70% of people, I mean, I feel left out when using social media. Yesterday, Boston Children's just announced this big, they built a new Alexa skill, and I was thinking like, oh, darn it, like they did it first. I'm like, oh, like I feel, or like I'll put something up, or like some of my friends will be together at a thing I didn't even know they were doing. I mean, give me a break. Like who wouldn't feel bad about that? So, but I probably feel worse about it than maybe my brother who's a little even-keeled, or my partner who is too. So, I think ultimately who we are is gonna matter on how these social skills are. This was a parenting talk, I'm gonna buzz through this too, but I did with Common Sense Media, and I did with a couple PhD researchers on the brain, and we were talking even about Fortnite. And the reason I wanna bring up Fortnite is around violence, that Fortnite is this game that went from 60 million users to 200 million users in a matter of 6 months. And I was telling the teens this yesterday. Part of that is because the people who write these video games are like hyper PhD, MIT trained people who are trying to figure out how to take your attention and keep it. These phones are designed to take your time and your attention and keep it, to take you away. There have been times when my 10-year-old son will literally, I'll be on my phone doing my stupid work or whatever I'm doing, or talking to my lovely friends, and my son will put his head in between my phone and my face. And like, how pathetic. Like, I'm a terrible person, right? I mean, I actually feel like a terrible person at that moment, but thank God he does that, because these kids are so amazing that he's like, I would actually like your time and attention, Mom. And I could say, oh, I'm just a bad person. Well, I actually don't think I'm a bad person, but I don't want to ignore my son, and he is more important to me than any job I'll ever do. So I'm realizing more and more like how manipulated we're being by these devices, and we will only be more and more and more and more manipulated by these devices over time. So, dinner time, like making rules in your home, and teens will probably be better at this than you are, but a device-free dinner, putting your phone in grayscale. So one of the things we did yesterday is I taught teens how to do that. It is one of the more powerful things that I've learned. If you're willing to take out your iPhone right now, and if you have an Android, I can show you afterward. We'll do this, this will take 20 seconds. Go to your iPhone and go to General. Settings, you go to Settings, the little wrench. Then you go to General. Are you guys at General? Okay, then about there's like one chunk of white, then there's accessibility. Click on accessibility. Now scroll all the way down to the bottom of accessibility, and it says, what does it say? What's the last one? Accessibility. Shortcut, thank you. Click that. And then in that list of different shortcuts, you can choose something that will change either your home button or your side button if you've got a 10 or more in an iPhone, and you just click color filters. Now you'll take your phone, and ultimately what you can do is you have basically just allowed your phone to go into what's called grayscale. This feature alone will show you, and you should show everyone you know this feature. This will show you the power of engineering. So if you put your phone into grayscale, all of a sudden it turns into a very unappealing place. There's no red badge, there's no one calling you, the ding and the dopamine that you get, that buzz of excitement like coffee that you get from your badges will go away. So if you're having one of those days where you kind of can't get out of your work, or you can't get off your phone, or you realize that you're in Facebook and it's making you feel like junk, or you've been on Instagram and you can't stop scrolling because the act of scrolling like petting a dog has been designed because it's like petting a dog, because intuitively scrolling actually makes you feel good and you can't stop doing it. But if you don't like your phone, turn it into grayscale. So now your phone, either the home button, you can triple click it, or the side button, you can triple click it, and then you can click it right back into color. But you can stop loving your phone as much as you do. And that might be one of the best things that we can do. Now, you guys covered all of this so much, but I want to just cover two pieces of data. This is a graph. Look at this graph. A 5-year-old could tell us something is happening over these years, right? So on the left side, this is 2008. On the right side is just 2015, and this is from Pediatrics, published just last year, trends in suicide ideation and suicide attempt for children at 31 children's hospitals in this nation. 7 years have gone by. All of us were alive the whole time. All of us were starting to use our phones more, but in 7 years, the rate of suicide attempts and the rate of thinking about wanting to end your life because you're in such anguish in teenagers has doubled. Hospital systems across this country are dealing with twice as many children who are that sick and that painful and that pained. So this this is a big problem. These teens are telling you that. They're more scared, they're more upset, and it's multifactorial, but it's not just their smartphones in some ways. But the second study that was just published in January that is remarkable to me is our opportunity as well, and that is that 50% of parents, this is a beautiful study that was done at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, 50% of parents to children who were suicidal didn't know it. 75% of parents whose teens were saying that they were thinking a lot about death didn't know it. So that's not a criticism of parents. That's just an acknowledgement that adolescence is an interesting time. In fact, parents will often in the exam room say, when I kick them out because we were going to talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and teens will I get to talk about the good stuff and help them and protect them. Parents will say, oh, we have a really close relationship. I'm like, oh no, out. And then when they get out, I always learn something else. Even really close families. The act of adolescence is to become independent. It is to detach. That includes detaching about your sexuality in some ways. Like, I don't talk about my sexuality or my intimacies, and I certainly didn't, with my first love in high school, talk about it in ways that were really personal with my parents. That was probably healthy. I was creating my own self as a sexual individual in the world, what I was projecting to the world, what I was wanting in the world, and that is an ongoing process in the teen years. In fact, we know, and I'll show this a little bit, but we know that when you're born with sex. So I was born with 2 X chromosomes. I was born and they said on this birth certificate in Minnesota, this is a baby girl. I was also born with a gender. That is, I identify as a girl. I identify as a woman. And we're born with that, we know. But it certainly can be born dysynchronous. So I could be born feeling that I was a boy. I might start to realize that when I'm about 3. A lot of children begin to start realizing maybe a dissonance there when they're 6. But typically, for many people, our gender isn't fully established until late adolescence or even early adulthood. And as the teens knew yesterday, their brains are still changing and forming. Ours are just getting old and shriveled. But until you're 24, your brain is still rewiring and you're still thinking about it. So that process of of us not knowing that, let's not beat ourselves up about it. Let's recognize that teen and peer-to-peer might be the most important support for teens who are in anguish, who are suffering, and who don't feel good. This is an amazing article that I would love for you guys to look at. It's open access. You can read it. It's just 13 things that pediatricians should know about 13 Reasons Why. 13 Reasons Why was do you guys know about 13 Reasons Why? Yeah, 13 Reasons Why was an online program that ultimately portrayed mental health challenges with a child who then went through the act of ending their own life with suicide. It is deeply criticized for many reasons. The 13 reasons that teens can read, but pediatricians read for anybody really, is that it's kind of this mimicry and mockery, but it also doesn't portray mental anguish in the way that it's a health problem. It makes it appear that ending life is a solution to a problem. It is not. It is a failure of a system and a culture to support someone who is in pain. It is a failure of a system to support people who have suffering emotionally. And it is a failure for us to not let people feel that they belong with just who they are. And this is a beautiful example of why media matters. Now, I believe we have to talk about firearms a lot. I know that this is a state that has a lot of firearm ownership, and I can be deeply unpopular. But I have come to believe in the last couple of years that firearm protection, gun safety laws, and talking about firearm protection is a public health issue. This is not a political issue. This is a public health issue. These teens, when I listen to them talk about being in schools and being frightened because of school shootings and mass shootings and even the amount of weapons in the United States, they are scared and they deserve our help. They do not write the laws in this country, we do. They do not even get to vote in this country, we do. And we have to take this seriously. And I bring this up because of that graph that I showed you about that doubling of suicide ideation and suicide attempts. 9 out of 10, I told the teens this yesterday, 9 out of 10 people who try to end their life with suicide. So the other thing is you're not supposed to say commit suicide, sorry. I just want to say that. You've maybe intentionally heard me. I have to keep rewriting it in my head, but you're not supposed to say that because it sounds as if it's a solution. It's not a solution. People who end their life from suicide are in deep suffering, but 9 out of 10 who attempt to end their life, once they get access to a behavioral health specialist, maybe medication, family support, and acknowledgement, 9 out of 10 of them will tell you they are so glad they didn't die. 9 out of 10 people who try that. They didn't try it for attention, they tried it out of anguish. That attempt was a point of profound human suffering. But 9 out of 10 of them, once they get what they deserve and need, are glad that it didn't happen. 9 out of 10 people or more who attempt to end their life with a firearm succeed. They are never given a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th chance. So you have to think very clearly about how we talk about firearms, and I hope being brave enough to listen to teens and what they think about it. But also, most strategically, the thing that you can do in your life today that I believe will probably save a life you don't even know you're saving is to make sure if you know someone who has a mental health challenge, who is upset, who is anxious, who is depressed, who you worry cares or is thinking about not having what they need or want in life, is basically getting firearms that are not in a safe environment out of the home. We know that in King County, where I live in Seattle area, 9% increased likelihood in a suicide attempt in a house with access to a firearm. So if we know the number of children who are depressed is about 20% throughout adolescence, that means 1 in 5 teens should be living in a home without access to a firearm. And yesterday, the 300 or whatever teens, or 200 maybe who were only left when I was talking, we did a live poll and I said, do you have access to a firearm? North of 35% said that they did. So if any of them, 1 out of 5 of them, was depressed or anxious, shouldn't be in their house. But this isn't just about teens, this is about anyone in your life. How we talk about it in media matters as well. 2 weeks ago, when the father of one of the victims of the Sandy Hook shooting ended his life by suicide, there were people from the state that reached out saying, how do we talk about this in media? There are responsible ways and not. This is called reportingonsuicide.org. Use this site even in your own flyers and education. And then asking about where firearms in houses. I think we just need to get more comfortable asking about it. They need to be, if you have firearms in your home, you have firearms in your home. If you're a firearm owner, I'm not even trying to get in the way of that. But I do want you to think really carefully if there are children around or teenagers around, anyone with mental health challenges, that they're locked and separated from ammunition, just stored safely, and it makes it a totally different ballgame. Okay, I'm just buzzing through this too. Okay, the other thing is can we listen to teens very carefully? Adults make mistakes all the time. In fact, highly trained, really educated people do too. I know I'm out of time. I'm gonna stop talking. You're gonna have to drag me off the stage, I know. Okay, and I really mean to respect your time because I want you to eat because I know I'm between you and your lunch, which is a big thing. This is this woman from the Pew Research Center. So Pew Research Center is this nonpartisan, non-political organization, just tells you kind of how you do things. But I thought this was amazing, and this is what happens to teens all the time. So it says, strong support among teens for gun policy proposals focused on mental illness. So they've done a study, they've evaluated what teens think. Now, at the top, it says, okay, the dark green, because it's hard to read, is very effective and somewhat effective, meaning that these teens are endorsing these ideas to make things better for them. And the first thing is preventing people with mental illness from purchasing guns. 86% of teens say that's the most important thing to do. The next thing they say is improving mental health screening and treatment. 86% of teens believe that we need to do a better job of that. Hello, they're telling you that here today. The next thing they say is that you should have metal detectors in school. About 8 out of 10 said that you should do that. Then they said banning assault-style weapons. 66% said that, so they were a little bit less divided. And then lastly, 39% of them said allow teachers and school officials to carry guns, okay? And the tweet that was sent by the people at the Pew, this is a researcher there, says 39% of teens think allowing teachers to carry guns would be effective. It's the least endorsed concept that the teens were asked about, and yet it's the one that was actually promoted to the public. So if you have an attention span like I do, which is like 2.5 seconds, because that's what Americans are like now, this is what you saw. So we can use our voices. So this is my Twitter handle. I'm Seattle Mom and Doc, but I said, I agree with these others here, but teens think teachers carrying guns are the least likely way, right, to help with a mental health crisis. Okay, very quickly, you guys have done such a beautiful job with this issue, and we even talked about this. This is the picture of my kids' bathroom at their school. So I was talking about all gender restrooms, and this is a post, and I'd love for you to look at it and share, but I do think that we can share these things. A couple of things. 41% of transgender people attempt to end their life. This is a study that was done in 2014. 70% of them experience homelessness at some point in their life. These are people who are born with just a different gender than the sex they were assigned at birth. It is not their fault. It is something to be celebrated, and it is something to be accepted. We know, in fact, you will profoundly change a child's life, any person, by just telling them that it's okay to be who they are and allowing them access to resources. So share resources whenever you can. You guys talked about this. You mentioned during your talk the thing, this is in one day in 2016, this is how many people they think were driving distracted. That was 16. Distraction is deadly. The number of people injured by distracted driving in 2015. And of course, the number of people killed by distracted driving in 2016. But this is statistics from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They have a beautiful site that's run by Flora Winston, who's an amazing researcher. But I love this, and you pointed it out, that actually teen drivers receive the most phone calls from their parents, mom and dad. So can it? Stop calling your teens because they feel really responsible to answer the phone. And you're being jerks by interrupting them. And use the do not disturb. And the first 6 months of driving is the most dangerous time of driving in our lifetime. And their teens are really distracting, but so is like eating and putting on makeup and using the radio. It's not just the cell phones that are distracting. If your teen or anyone you know in your life has a diagnosis of ADHD and has been prescribed a stimulant, that's the other thing we can't forget. If they're going to drive, they need to take their medicine. True. Good data on that. Okay, I'm almost done. You're going to be done with me. I think this is true. Right? Yeah. And I'm starting to feel really naked without my RBG. So in closing, I'm going to go grab my RBG for her support and power. And I thank you for listening to me this long. I just want to see. We built these stupid things. I want to get to this one other. We built these apps on resilience and stress management. We built some apps at Children's on opioids, going home and teaching people how to use them and not use them, and I'll talk to anyone about it. But okay, a couple of things. Teens always hear this thing about digital footprint. They're like really tired of hearing about it, as well they should, because this is, of course, that we need to have a digital footprint and use our voices, and you use your voices and advocate, and you help these teens get their voices out and share what they know. Because you have this opportunity in life, more than ever before, to have a digital fingerprint. You can be everything that you are and more in sharing your ideas and listening in different ways. Patients want their data and teens want their data in each other. And this is a really positive report. This is called the Hope Lab report. It was published last year by some leading researchers, Vicki Rideout and Susanna Fox, who used to be the CTO under Obama at HHS. But they looked at really what were teens doing online. And what they found were really positive experiences, not just negative experiences. Reporting health resources online. 87% of teens are going online for health information. So you don't have to teach classes and classes and classes. You have to give them great information that they can share with each other. So start celebrating and sharing information that they've got. They use these mobile apps. Then this graph on the right, this is something, again, about if these teens scored moderate to severe with depressive symptoms, again, 1 out of 5 will likely score that way, they use them differently. So 9 out of 10, the dark yellow are those who are depressed. 9 out of 10 of them used the internet between the age of 14 and 22 to get mental health information, and they went looking for people like them online. Because they don't have enough health providers. We don't have enough. If 1 out of, I heard the ratio, this 250, you have a counselor for every 250 people. So they don't have a lot of resources in your life at times. They're going online and finding each other. This is frequency of social media use between 14 and 22-year-olds. Several times a day is about half of them. 17 times a day is kind of constantly that way. I thought these next two is kind of boring to look at, but this is really like when you're feeling depressed and stressed, anxious, how do you feel among social media users? And most people feel neither. They kind of go online and they feel just like they did. They remain unchanged. So I don't know that it's such a bad place or even such a good place. This is the same. This is basically, does it make me feel better? Does it make me feel worse? Well, neither, when I actually am feeling depressed and things that way. But I love these quotes, and this is kind of where I'll end. Like, I follow a lot of positive pages on social media, so I feel better when I see a funny video or a cute video. And like music listening, for example, is a great oasis. If your child is depressed and lonely and they broke a rule, I think the last thing you do is take away their phone and their connection and their belonging and their community. I'm feeling depressed, getting on Twitter and seeing funny tweets or watching videos make me feel good. Makes me feel better because I read encouragement and inspiration to keep myself motivated and feeling anxious. It is like really hard to be alive. And this was really hard to get to the end, and thank you. And I'm thankful to RBG, but I'm really so impressed with all of you and what you're doing, and please let me help you. And then let's get forward to get huge, big motivator changes, and let's get Jim to go all over the country and do this in every state. And thank you for leading the way. Thank you.
But I feel like a lot of it was geared towards the educators.
Yeah.
So as a parent, in supporting the teens and as they grow into adulthood, what do you suggest for parents to do when it comes to bullying and cell phone use? You said not to take it away, but any suggestions overall that you can provide?
Well, if anything, if you ask teens what's most important to them, it's your presence. It's your attention. And it's your time. They'll tell you that over and over and over again. It's like my embarrassment, right, that my 10-year-old puts his head between my phone and my face. So of anything you can do, you can be present. The data on family meals, we used to talk about as family dinner, is delicious. It's really like if you sit and talk to each other without the TV on, without the cell phone on, without any interruption, that time leads to lower rates of incarceration, lower substance abuse. In fact, teens are less likely to use alcohol or illicit substances in the teen years if their parents just tell them they don't want them to. Teens will always want your support and approval. It doesn't matter how hard and complicated and painful your relationship is, they want your support, attention, and approval. So listen to them, follow along, ask them how they feel about things, and support them in getting more of what they want. If they're being bullied, they likely need support and advocacy. They likely need tips of how you had a hard time in your life. It's like I think about like the inner critic who's always in our minds telling us like, I look this way, I look that way. I just said that, I can't believe I did that. Our inner critics make very bad bookkeeping errors. We do great things all day. And then we screw up once and we spend a week thinking about how badly we screwed up. If we tell our kids how hard it is to put our phone down in the car, how we have to put our do not disturb on, how we put it in our purse in the back seat of the car so that we're not tempted to reach over to it because we can't wait to hear something that way. If we listen to how they're feeling alone and provide opportunities and work on support, I think that's a huge start. I think most of all, teens will also tell you, and they said this yesterday, and I don't know if you guys said it again this morning, that sometimes it's not a fixer that they're looking for. They're just looking to be listened to and heard, belonged and seen, right? Go back to like Starbucks. I know it's stupid, it's just a coffee company, but what did they go and how do they run the world selling coffee? Well, people just want to be known. So I think as a parent, we have to keep working really hard. It's just as hard for us to not use our phones as it is for teens. In fact, I spend more time texting my friends than I do in person with my friends. So I'm as guilty as the finger point that we like to do as adults. But I think that this ongoing connection to our teens and our willingness to know how they feel and where they are and what they want is, I think, what we do first. And I think whatever rules we can use, they may not even apply to you. So it's really... Can you show up and just be present and maybe not be even a fixer? That's what I would say. Yeah.